Hello, my name is Douglas Bloch. Welcome to the Depression Recovery Channel, where each week we talk about practical tools and coping strategies for healing from depression and anxiety. Today is Flashback Friday, a feature in which I republish one of my earlier videos you might not have seen that contains really important coping strategies that will help you attain a better mood. Now here's today's video. The name of today's video is How to Overcome Your Negativity Bias. Before we do so, we need to tell our regular joke. I don't know much about Switzerland, but its flag is a big plus. One of the cardinal symptoms of depression is to focus on what's wrong instead of what's right. The psychiatrist Aaron Beck called this the cognitive triad of depression. He says it consists of three things. The first is a negative view of self, the second is a negative view of the world, and the third is a negative view of the future. Comedian Lily Tomlin echoed this when she said, "Things will get worse before they get worse." Another name for this bias towards gloom and doom, it's called the negativity bias. And we're going to talk about that right now, what it is and how you can get over it. This negativity bias is simply our tendency to focus more on our negative thoughts and the events of our lives than the positive thoughts and events. This is why we think or have much more pain when we think of our losses than joy when we think of our successes. Now, it's not just depressed people who have this negativity bias, it's hardwired into the human nervous system. And this is because we evolved in the wild in tribes and we were constantly surrounded by threats and dangers like being eaten by wild animals. And so it was evolutionarily advantageous to be aware of threats, to be fearful. Oh my God, what's going to happen? The saber-toothed tiger might be jumping out of the bushes. And those who were more able to do that were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. So this is something that comes from antiquity, and we all have to deal with it one way or another. In modern times, we're not being threatened by wild animals, and nevertheless, the sense of danger is reinforced by the media, which reports much more in the bad news than the good news. A visionary Barbara Marx Hubbard once said, the media is like a nervous system that only transmits pain and not pleasure. But we don't have to be doomed by this negativity. There are always ways to transcend it, and the psychiatrist Edith Elgar was a prisoner in the Auschwitz concentration camp, which is a place of obviously toxicity, horror, and you can't get more negative than that. And yet, in the midst of it all, she maintained a sense of hope and expectancy that she would one day be liberated. And she told herself over and over again, it's only a matter of time until this happens. And she somehow, again, managed to stay optimistic in the face of, absolutely horrendous circumstances. She wrote about this in a book called The Choice, which I recommend to anybody. And it was reviewed by Nobel Prize winner Desmond Tutu. And this is what he said. Dr. Elgar's life reveals our capacity to transcend even the greatest of horrors and to use that suffering for the benefit of others. In other words, it's not only just what happens to us that determines our attitude, but how we interpret that and how we respond to it. So the question becomes, how can we imitate Dr. Elgar and train our minds to look at the world more optimistically? Well, one way to do this is to focus on what's going right with our lives instead of what's going wrong. Let me give you an example. As many of you know who've been following me for the last, 9 years, I'm an avid cyclist, but as age has crept up, I'm not, I think, didn't Scrooge say at the end of Christmas Carol, I'm not the man I was, right? Anyway, I'm not the cyclist I was, and I was bemoaning the fact on this ride with my good friend Peter, I could not make it up Rocky Butte, 600-foot, climb, and I was thinking, oh my God, what's wrong with me, and just kvetching. And he said, Douglas, we're doing a 20-mile bike ride around the airport. Think a lot of 73-year-olds can't do that. So, let's celebrate the fact you're still able to ride, 20 miles without too much difficulty and focus on that. What if you woke up each day and the first thing you did is ask the following questions? What are the positive aspects of my life right now? What is working to support me in my health and healing? What can I be grateful for? And if you sat long enough, you might think, oh, well, I have my health, relative health. I have a roof over my head, gas in the tank, food in the cupboard, the sun is shining, I have a good friend, my child is doing well in school, whatever. If you look hard enough, you can find something. And if we do this often enough, train our brains. Someone once said if you write down what you're grateful for 21 days in a row, you literally change the circuitry in your brain to create more grooves, so to speak, like grooves in those old records. And that will literally change the way you think. The brain chemistry will change, so will your thoughts, and you will develop a more optimistic attitude. So the idea is to train your thinking, train your thoughts, and focus on, again, what's right and not what's lacking. The other popular way to, or I should say effective way of changing your negativity bias is to consciously identify each negative thought in your brain and replace it with a more positive or realistic one. Now, this is very similar to the find and replace function in word processing programs. I mean, it's become so normal for all of us who write, or most of us who write on computers. You don't like a word, you hit find and then you hit replace. Well, the brain also has a find and replace function that you can use at any time. For example, one of the major default mechanisms of the brain when you get really depressed is a sense that it will never get any better. I call this the forever mentality. It's very easy to slip into that mentality and to get stuck in it. And of course, if it goes on long enough, you start to think, well, maybe I shouldn't be here. Well, that happened to me when I was 25 years old during a really bad depressive episode. And I had a very good therapist who said, now, Douglas, I know you think this is never going to end, but were you ever depressed before? I said, yes, when I went to college in my freshman year. It was horrible. I barely graduated. The therapist said, did you come out of it then? I said, yes, I did. He said, well, if you came out of it then, you can come out of it now. The best prediction of the future is the past. So tell yourself, this may feel like it's forever, but it's not forever. I said, okay, it may feel like it's forever, but it's not forever. And sure enough, about 6-7 months later, I emerged from the episode like the phoenix rising from the ashes. So again, the tendency to think this will never get any better, if you really work on it and get enough support, you can shift that way of viewing your future. This lesson or technique of saying to myself, well, if I came out of it before, I'll come out of it now, has proved very, very, very helpful because unfortunately, depression, like addiction, is a chronic relapsing condition. Since that time, I've had a number of relapses, but I've always told myself, well, I came out of it before, I can do it again. Past is a good predictor of the future, and in fact, I have resurrected. Last episode was at the age of 66, I'm now 73, so knock on whatever this is, I'll be able to stay relatively well, for at least another 7 years. And finally, a quick way, Tony Robbins, who's this very famous motivational trainer, once said something I'll never forget. He said, the quickest way to change your state of mind is to change your physiology. And that's the same way of getting out of a negative state, a negatively biased state, which means running, aerobic exercise specifically, right? Running in place, taking a brisk walk, going for a bike ride like I like to do. This produces something called endorphins, right? Endogenous morphines, which immediately produce a sense of well-being and overpower whatever negative thinking we had. So you can use your thoughts to change your physiology, but you can also do the opposite, use your physiology to change your thoughts. Like any habit, the negativity bias can be hard to change, especially since it's hardwired into our brains and nervous system. However, it can be done so with vigilance, determination, and persistence. Now, if your negativity bias is also happening because of a dysfunctional upbringing that involves trauma and repeated abuse, etc., this can be even more difficult, especially if you have something called complex PTSD, which we'll talk about in a future video. So if you've got this really bad upbringing, in your past, you probably need to find a good therapist, counselor, psychiatrist to get the additional support to change your brain chemistry and start to think positively. This has been Douglas Bloch. I hope you found the information on this Flashback Friday video helpful. If so, please give it a like, as likes draw more and more people to this channel and hopefully some more subscribers. You can also leave your comments in the comments section or email me, douglasbloch@gmail.com. If you do want to subscribe to this channel, click on my photo in the closing credits. You'll be taken to my subscribe page. And if you click on the bell to the right, you'll be notified every time I do a new video or live chat. And if you want to contribute to this channel and become a patron, simply click on the Patreon image. You'll be taken to my crowdfunding site. And until next video, I wish you the best in your mental health recovery. Thank you so much.